told you it was good. Look, there's one here. I totally knew it was going to be a dude fest. Look at this. That's what I was saying. After we're done here, we're going to keep this quick and dirty. We're all going to go in the alley and have a fight club. All right? Of course. Oh no, this is they did it topless. We're doing it bottomless. All right? You're getting all this C-SPAN books that you're never going to show this, of course. Yeah, why not? Yeah. We're going to do this quick and dirty. I can't imagine I'm going to lecture a bunch of people I've known for a very long time about my book, and this is ridiculous, but let's do it anyway. No, you can heckle, please, mercilessly heckle me. Please. I deserve it because my head is getting a little too big, obviously, from a recent spike in sales. So yes, I need to have knocked down a few pegs. So I only had my first reading yesterday, so I'm still figuring out how to do a book reading, and the reason I really don't know how is because I've never really liked attending book readings because I thought they were really boring. It's like some guy sitting up here, you know, giving you the 1,000-yard stare while trying to make their words sound really important, and I never really thought that was all that compelling. So I'm just going to read a few pages that I read yesterday. That's the very beginning of the book. Some of you have read it, some of you haven't. So, you know, strap in. And then maybe afterward, if you want to ask me some questions or do something that makes this cruise time worth their while, let's try to do that. And then we can all get the hell out of here. So, Chapter 1, Freelancing in Afghanistan, September 6th, 2010. Kunar Province, Eastern Afghanistan. The company commander at Combat Outpost Pirtle King only half-heartedly offers to let me tag along on a mission in the mountains that will kick off at 3 a.m., probably thinking I'm not up to it. He warns me it's an all-day, ass-breaking hump up steep mountains littered with ankle-twisting rocks and Taliban boogeymen. Though daunted by his description of the day, I tell him I'm game, convincing myself it will give me the perfect opportunity to document the difficulty of the fight in this corner of Kunar Province, a relative safe haven for militants crossing the porous border from Pakistan. More importantly, I don't want the commander to think I'm a pussy. I've been embedding with U.S. forces for years, both in Afghanistan and Iraq, so I have a pretty decent idea of what it takes to get readers interested in a story. A firefight helps. So does anything blowing up, hopefully nothing that puts soldiers in harm's way. With that in mind, I insert myself into situations that will make for tantalizing reading so folks will pay attention to what's going on over here. That doesn't mean I'm not scared shitless when I do it, I just leave that part out of my stories. I can't let soldiers see I'm scared either. It makes some of them nervous enough having a journalist in their midst, wondering whether something I'm going to report will get them chewed out by their commanders or end their careers. Worse yet would be me panicking when the action kicks off and jeopardizing their lives by doing something stupid. They can't be thinking about me when they need to focus all their attention and firepower on the guys trying to kill them. Count on me for tomorrow, I tell the commander as calmly as I can, hoping he doesn't notice the tremor in my right leg. After a few hours of nervous twilight sleep, I meet up with the men preparing in the darkness for the torturous slog ahead. During the pre-mission brief, the platoon leader warns them to keep their eyes open for snipers hiding behind boulders and in the caves that dot the mountain. I listen to his instructions while stuffing my bag with bottles of water and nervously inhaling several knockoff Chinese Marlboro Lights. I'm up to 3/4 of a pack a day, evidenced by the mud-colored phlegm that I spit. That's too much for me. I wake up every morning feeling like there's a cinder block on my chest. My nervousness about this mission isn't unwarranted. I've had a handful of close calls on embeds in Afghanistan, most of them here in Kunar. Last summer, just a few miles south of Pirtle King, I got pinned down with a platoon along a riverbed. Gunmen tucked behind boulders and positioned on nearby hilltops fired on us from 3 sides. We were soundly fucked. Shots pinged off the stone and mud walls we crouched behind, and it occurred to me we might not make it out. Finally, we screwed up the gumption to sprint across a wide-open expanse toward a footbridge across which armored vehicles were parked. Once across, everyone scurried for the quickest cover. A dozen soldiers piled in the back of a truck designed to hold 6 men. Bullets plinked off the truck's armored plating. Somehow, no one was hurt. "Several more days till I go home," said one soldier, laughing. pinned under 1,500 pounds of young men in the steel-walled cabin of the armored truck, I caught on camera the mass of haphazardly stacked soldiers, their faces conveying a mixture of relief and jubilation at escaping yet another close call in Kunar province. I'm preparing myself for the possibility of more of the same today at the start of our pre-dawn excursion. We pass through the gate of the combat outpost and set out along a dirt road for a couple hundred yards, then hang a sharp right, taking a winding, snaking trail up into the side of the mountain. After 10 minutes of humping up steep faces cloaked in darkness, stumbling over every other step, my lungs are a raging inferno. Oh, fuck, I'm thick-headed for tagging along. Between gasps, I tell myself for the 10,356th time that I will quit smoking as soon as I get back from Afghanistan. No more excuses. After 2 hours of climbing, day breaks over the jagged mountain peaks. We rest halfway up the mountain. Soldiers take defensive positions while I guzzle water and try to capture the moment on video. The sun streaks over verdant mountains' faces peppered with craggy boulders and settles on the ginger red thatch of Lieutenant Derek Zotto's unruly pubic hair and exposed genitalia. The inseam of his pants are ripped wide open from countless climbs in these mountains. The terrain in Kunar wreaks havoc on uniforms, blowing out crotches after just a few missions. It's a common problem for the men at Pirtle King. A few other guys are also sporting crotchless fatigues. After seeing seeing as though there's no running water at Pirtle King, Zotto isn't the only one not wearing underwear. I conduct an impromptu, on-camera interview with Zotto on the side of the mountain in whispered tones so as not to alert any potential Taliban in our midst of our presence, urging him to keep his legs closed and try not to laugh. It sucks not having the high ground, he muses from my video camera about the distinct disadvantage soldiers have in the mountains where Taliban fighters have the geographic advantage. I wrap up the interview, then grab some B-roll shots of his dong, just for fun. After our short break, we slog on. Several hours later, the summit doesn't look any closer. Are we there yet? I ask in a coolly received effort at comedic relief, knowing damn well that we still have a ways to go. I groan like a child getting on his parents' last nerves while en route to SeaWorld. Ugh. I'm running out of gas. My bulletproof vest and camera gear seem to be getting heavier with every step. I shouldn't bitch. My load is nothing compared to the 100+ pounds those guys are lugging around. Laden with extra magazines of ammo and other gear, their vests weigh twice as much as mine. Their weapons, an awkward mass of metal whose shifting weight over uneven terrain constantly alters their centers of gravity, making climbing these mountains near impossible without occasionally toppling. Specialist Jeff Hutchins stumbles over loose boulders and lands face forward, his legs splayed behind him. "Is my helmet crooked?" he quips in a whisper as he pops up with his Kevlar head cover cocked forward over his eyes and resting on the bridge of his nose. The rest of us suppress our laughter. We spend the rest of the increasingly sweltering morning hauling ourselves over and around boulders as we reach our objective, a summit the soldiers dubbed Operation Post East. It's a flat, shadeless expanse with views of now tiny Pirtle King and the river valley below. We all shed our gear, collapse to the ground, our clothes stained with sweat that's dried into a crystallized tie-dyed pattern of salt on khaki and camouflage. It took us 8 ankle-rolling, deep-heaving hours to reach the summit, and now that we're up here, it feels like it's well over 90 degrees despite the elevation. I look out at the terraced hillsides carved out by countless generations of Afghan farmers who still work the land with basic hand tools. I'm near passed out and dehydrated just hiking up here, and the Afghans on the other side of the valley are doing it every day to tend to their vegetables. Either I'm in lousy shape, or these are the hardest people on the planet. I dig into my bag for a drink and discover I'm down to a bottle and a half of water. Some of the soldiers are nearly dry too. My joy at reaching the top drains away and is replaced by dread of the climb down, knowing it will be a dry-throated dash back to the outpost. Meanwhile, we need to return before sunset. That's when the Taliban are more likely to attack. After an hour's rest, Zotto orders his men to throw on their gear so that we can start the long haul back to Pirtle King. The descent is always quicker, but the perils are greater going down. If anyone is watching us, the climb down would be the ideal time to strike. With our heads facing down and our energy depleted, we are extremely vulnerable to potential sniper attacks from the peaks above us. Halfway down the mountain, 2 soldiers suffering from dehydration stop dead in their tracks, and their faces stark white and gaunt. Hutchins, a medic, whips out IV bags and jabs their inner forearms to pump them with fluids as they lay motionless on the mountainside. Combating my squeamishness at the sight of the IV needles, I focus my camera on Sergeant Chris Klein, who immediately takes umbrage with the sight of my camera directed at him. "Dude, don't film this," he says, his eyes rolling back in his head due to exhaustion and extreme dehydration. His cheeks are hollow and his face the color of skim milk. A moment later, he relents. "Oh, what the hell? Go ahead." There you go. That's as much as I'll read before it gets really tedious for me and for you. But if anybody has any questions or wants to chime in about something, let me know and we'll have a little powwow. Anyone? Anyone? Go ahead, Com, who I've known since the 6th grade, who's going to throw me a softball.
No, I'm not. In the book, you talk a lot about your relationship with your family, and I'm wondering, just at the end of this book.
I already had this today, and I'm already going to. Okay, go ahead.
You did?
No, Megan Kelly gave this to me.
Did she?
Yeah.
I did not see that.
No, it was within the break. Go ahead. What?
How has your relationship with your family changed from writing this book?
They've been really supportive. That I've in this, not to give away too much of the goodies inside, but yeah, there's a lot in there about some of the more contentious aspects of our relationship over the years that I haven't been able to resolve because I'm a man-child in some ways. So, here's something that I know that they haven't said to me, but I've come across this knowledge. Since I got hurt, there's a lot of things that they will let slide in terms of my sometimes obnoxious behavior, and I try not to take advantage of that because that's even more man-childish than I already am. So, so I hope that now that I finished it and I've got the publishing monkey off my back, that maybe I'll be a little easier to get along with. And yeah, we'll be fine. It'll take a while, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I've known you for a while. I spent time with you in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
The pay is shit. The hours are long. The food isn't good.
Yeah.
Why do you do it?
Before I was doing this, I was a bartender and a bouncer, and I taught children how to swim in a YMCA. And the pay was probably better with those 3 as compared to being a freelance conflict reporter. But oh man, every time someone asks me this question, I give a different answer, and I try not to give that one that all pretentious. People who want to sound important, regarding their work give about, bearing witness and all that, yada, yada. I'm pretty good at it, I think. I'm not the best, but I'm pretty good. And I like the thing I like about in-bed reporting is that I get the opportunity to sit down and talk to somebody on one-on-one basis. I like to tell small stories. I don't like to tell stories from the 30,000-foot angle. I'm not an investigative journalist. I don't cover the Pentagon or the White House and these big sweeping narratives. I like just talking to the young guys and women who are out there doing the job and seeing what's going on in their lives and giving just readers the peek through the keyhole about what's going on in one particular place at a certain time. And hopefully they are interested enough to read not just that story, but other stories from other reporters to create the bigger picture themselves. So I'm just the one puzzle piece. That's all I really want to be. That's why I do it. It's just so. Yeah, what's up, Krish? I've known for a long time as well.
Carmen, you've written about your experience in Afghanistan, and obviously you got hurt there, and it's been more than around 10 years now. Is that?
I got hurt in 2010. So yeah, what's it? 2018.
Years, right?
Yeah.
And, I mean, the situation. I mean, with what happened yesterday in Afghanistan, with a bunch of journalists being killed. How do you think the security situation has changed since the time you were there, and how has it changed for journalists? Because there was a pretty thriving media scene in Kabul. What do you think is happening?
It's gotten a lot worse, obviously. Yeah, well, there aren't nearly as many foreign reporters there because there's waning interest in Afghanistan, unfortunately, by news organizations, and the fact of the matter is now that the Taliban and the Islamic State are targeting the capital with impunity. And this latest look, anytime you bomb civilians, it's an atrocity and hideous. But to bomb and then wait for people to gather and do it again is monstrous. I mean, there's nothing worse than that, really. And that's a go-to Taliban tactic, as any soldier or Marine will tell you. They'll hit you once. They like to wound somebody, and then when everybody comes to their aid, they try to hit you again. And you know, it saddens me. I had two Afghan friends, good journalists and good friends, who I was scrambling yesterday to try to reach, and fortunately neither one of them were hurt. But it was a sweaty few hours until I was able to locate them. Because I thought for sure they go to those bombings every day. Those guys who cover Afghanistan, the local journalists, and they go and do it day in and day out. That's a level of commitment that I'll never experience. I'll never understand. I mean, those guys are well above and beyond anything I do. That's my opinion of them. So. Yeah.
So, knowing what you know now,
Mm-hmm.
would you have gone, and would you go back, and are you glad you went?
Yeah. Not to give away too much of the goodies in the book, but yeah, I have been back since then. I have actually been back to Afghanistan 6 times since I got hurt, and so yeah, it's not that I am not fearful, because I am. I'm afraid all the time, and not just of those situations. I saw a rat on the subway in New York the other day, and I screamed like a little girl because that scared. Nobody else seemed to notice or care, and I jumped out of my skin when I saw the thing. But you know, like I said, I'm not really built to do much else. So, but it's something that that's something that I continue to, I guess, confront. And good. Yep.
You know, I got a lot of questions.
Oh yeah, good.
So this is your first book.
Yeah.
I want to kind of ask you about storytelling.
Yeah.
So you've been going overseas for a long time. You've been writing for a long time as a journalist. How do you make the jump from saying, hey, I want to put something together, something that's worthwhile, something that's meaningful to yourself, put it together as a storyteller, and then where do you go from there?
You know, I originally wrote a short story that was actually it was an article for Esquire based on what had happened to me, and I started from that moment on to think that there was a potential to tell a larger story, and I felt like I wanted to tell one because not only do people ask me about it all the time, hey, I heard you're that guy that got shot in the face, tell me that story. So I've told this story so many times, you know. No, it's not. Unfortunately, it doesn't work anymore because now I'm married, so it doesn't, you know. I don't get to trade in on that as much as I used to because my wife is really sick of hearing that story. She has no interest in she's like, she knows every detail. So I always wanted to write a book, and I never knew what that book was going to be about. But I thought that I had a story to tell. I thought I had a voice that would lend itself to a bigger narrative. So I wanted to give that a try, and this seemed like the right opportunity. I had so much rolling around in my head about these incidents to the point where before I started writing it, between the time I went back to Afghanistan and all the moments that are chronicled in the book, between that time and the time I actually put my ass in the chair to write, I just lived in a perpetual loop of reliving those moments over and over and over again, to the detriment of the present that I had at that time, and everybody around me I really wasn't paying attention to, because I was just always thinking about, I wasn't the concept of book that I was thinking about. It was just I couldn't let all that stuff go. So I thought, okay, I'm going to write about it, and maybe that'll help me be more present on a day-to-day basis. And it does a little bit, Yeah, I mean, that was the intent. I think that was the intent, and I even mentioned this in the intro about how I wanted that I thought the book would be some kind of remedy, and it really wasn't. It's not a matter of just writing a book and telling a story, but you have to allow yourself to not dwell all the time, and actually that takes a certain amount of discipline. So the book did help me do that, because it gave me that psychological permission to let some of that go and then start living like a normal human being, or my closest approximation of a normal human being.
So what about the second part of the question?
What?
Where to now?
I just came back from Iraq, and I was doing a project there where we're trying to combine good journalism and storytelling with motorcycling, because I am myself. You'll probably be surprised to hear this, but a lot of people who cover conflict also like to ride motorcycles. Like, that's so surprising, And there are a ton of us that do, and we've got it in our heads, this concept that in order to try to draw attention to the stories that we think are important, we have to play a different game, because they're not getting the play that they should. So I did a story in August for Motorcyclist magazine about riding in Mosul. We bought a motorcycle there with a sidecar, and we had it fixed, and we told the story of the people in the city and what had been happening in Iraq through this motorcycle. We talked to the mechanic who had fixed it, and how he, under the Islamic State, had been forced to fix their bikes, and how bikes were forbidden for other people to ride, and just the general state of their lives under the Islamic State tyranny. And so getting the bike out was part of that story, and it was a way for us to try something different, try the different tack for getting people interested, and it seemed to work. So we're trying to do that now, not just in Iraq, but other places as well, where we've done reporting that we think are places that aren't particularly appreciated as well as they should be. So, yes.
So I imagine that you mentioned you have fear when you go back to Afghanistan. You've been several times, and it's completely understandable. But I wonder if you have like additional fears now that you are a parent and you have a kid, and like how do you grapple with that? Because it's something that you love to do, and it's something you're cut out for. But at the same time, I imagine it's a challenge to go out and continue doing this when you've got now you're married and you have a kid and everything.
Yeah.
So sorry if that's a tough question.
No, it's a tough question because that time I was just telling you about, we were riding motorcycles in Iraq. My wife said to me, "If you get hurt in Iraq riding motorcycles, don't come home. Just don't bother. You're not gonna put me through that." I worry about that. So I try not to take what I think are stupid risks. I try to take what I call calculated risks. And I could sit here and tell you all day what's the difference between the two. But being a parent has changed my perception definitely of the stories that I cover. Before I had my daughter, I was able to have a certain level of detachment in the moment when and saw certain kinds of suffering, and I didn't realize just how much it had changed me until last spring when I was in Mosul, and this is when the fighting was really fierce. And I was embedded with the Iraqi Special Forces, and they were pushing into Western Mosul, and people were streaming out that were just being liberated, who had been living under the Islamic State tyranny for 2 years, and they were coming out with everything they had in their arms, including their children, and some of which had just been caught in a bombardment and had these lacerations all over their faces. And a young girl was holding a baby in her arms, and their baby was like slack, and I wasn't sure if it was still alive, and it was my daughter's age, and I was like, oh, that was I had to take a moment in a way that I didn't know would affect me. It hadn't, not that it didn't affect me, but I was able to maintain some semblance of composure in the past, and at that moment I couldn't. That bothered me a lot. And so now when I especially when I see kids suffer, that really bothers me a lot. So I have to try to it's not going to stop me from doing those kinds of stories, but it's also just a greater challenge now, I think, so that's it. What's up, Eastburn? Showing up late like a rock star? You think you're Mr. Important just because you're in the book? Anybody else? Yeah.
So, having been back several times now, what kind of shifting attitudes have you noticed between the locals and troops that are there?
You know what? Actually, I haven't been back to Afghanistan in 5 years, and I hate to paint with attitudes with a broad brushstroke, just because, people in one village don't have the same attitude as others. Some are under extreme pressure from the Taliban, and you don't know that fact until the soldiers leave and the Taliban come in right afterwards, after you have a meeting. This guy knows. He went through that think times. So I don't want to say this is how these people are perceived, or this is how they think about U.S. presence there, because that's like saying, I remember when I was in Iraq in 2013, and it was the 10-year anniversary of the initial U.S. invasion, and I was somebody was asking me, well, what do the Iraqis think about this? I'm like, I don't know. I haven't talked to all of them. I'm just in Baghdad. I have no fucking clue what these people, what they think, And I don't want to be the kind of guy that says, well, this is what, the Afghan mindset is, because it's a very diverse culture and on ethnic and tribal lines. I can't say. And I'm not an expert. I never profess to be an expert about what's going on in Afghanistan. The more time I would spend there, the more I realized how little I know. And I always think of myself like, for example, you have your Afghanistan experts. You have your Steve Cole, Ghost Wars guy. Like, he's the PhD level Afghanistan guy. Like, I'm the hooked on phonics Afghanistan guy. ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. That's not what my book is about. Like, I'm not that guy that's going to tell you what's going on. My goal is to tell a story, and to try to entice people that maybe aren't particularly interested in this part of the world. And maybe through my personal story, they will inadvertently maybe become more interested, and that interest will continue after they put down my book. Hopefully, that's part of the goal, I think. So, yep.
I have one more question. Which
Go
is, we came up in journalism around the same time,
yeah.
And we came up at a time when we wrote stories which were, we weren't in the story. Right. So how have you managed to transition doing reporting about other people to turning the lens on yourself, so to speak? How have you managed to do that? Was that difficult?
Yeah, it was. At first, it was very difficult because I wasn't sure that anybody would give a damn. But I knew it's something that I wanted to do, and I think, as I knew I wanted to write this story, and I naturally, when you're starting out something completely different. You experiment. Say, I'm going to try to write it this way, and maybe I'll write it in a third person, or maybe I'll experiment with tense and and other ways in which to try to grab a reader's attention. But I just gravitated toward the first person, and it just seems to work for me. I also write in the present tense, which a lot of people criticize. I use date lines to tell people where they are in the story. I picked up this technique, and these guys will appreciate this because it's something from Pittsburgh. People in Pittsburgh have a tendency to tell stories in bars in the present tense, and they'll say something to the effect, I'm going to use a little bit of a Pittsburgh accent here. They'll be like, so I says to my buddy Chucky that I was, and it's about something that happened in the past, but he says, I says. And it actually makes for really compelling storytelling because they're telling something that they did that was completely insane. That was some kind of drunken debacle, but they'll say, "Well, I says to him that I know that." But in the downtime, your downtime is spent. You get to know people. I got to know these two characters over here, and other journalists who are stuck in the same place. You make fast friends. You eat free food at the DFAC, usually at the larger bases. You tell these, we would always make these jokes about how, war is hell because at the dining facility at the base where these two guys were based at, sometimes they didn't have pralines and cream ice cream. They would run out. And my grandfather fought in the South Pacific, and they were eating grubs and chewing on their belts while fighting the Japanese in the bush. We're like, oh shit, there's no cookies and cream, like, I know that happens. War is hell. But you get to meet good folks along the way, and there are stories to be told. While you're waiting, along the way. One time I had this long stint where I was stuck on a base, and I was just hanging out with a bunch of soldiers, and I wrote a story about what kind of video games they like to play, because the guys who tend to go out on missions and get into a lot of firefights, they don't play the first-person shooter games. They tend to play the sports games. But the guys who are in the rear more often and don't get out, they're the ones that play the first-person shoot-'em-up games. Or the time that I had some time between embeds, and I went back to the same hospital where I had been treated when I first got hurt, and I met with ophthalmologists and talked to soldiers who had sustained eye injuries, and met with them and saw what kind of care they were receiving. So, I had a personal interest in that, and so I get to do those kinds of stories as well. So it's not all, bang and run and gun, and it's very little of that. In fact, even when you're out in the remote combat outpost, there's long periods where nothing's going on. You're just hanging out, shooting the shit, smoking cigarettes, and talking about sports, and that's how you get to know people, really. So, my former boss.
I want to come back to this idea about the puzzle piece, the little keyhole view that your stories as an embed provide, because it troubles me a little bit.
Why?
Well, don't you have an obligation to give a bigger picture? This is a war, and isn't there a danger that when you're embedded like that, those little puzzle pieces, the little keyhole glimpses, all point one direction?
That's a good point. Typically in my stories, this is stuff that I was writing for USA Today, so it's not like I was getting into it as deep as I would like to. Typically no more than 1,000 words, so yeah, I have to, pick and choose the words. There would be a paragraph or two about the bigger picture, but not nearly as much as needed. And I always had to be encouraged by my editors to make sure that I included that in there. But what I did in the book was try to tell small stories and weave them together in a way that told a little bit of a bigger picture of what's going on in Afghanistan at that time, in that place, from various vantage points, through my eyes and my experience. But in my journalism, yeah, I do have to, and I admit, be reminded sometimes by my editors that, hey, you need to couch this in a, well, you know, while this is happening here, this is what's happening in the larger theater and how it's being represented or being perceived in Washington and by world leaders. So yeah, I did that, but I don't consider that my forte. Like, I'm the guy that just talks to another guy, and I look around and I say, what's going on here? And I you know, tell me your story. I'm much better at that. Like, you're a good investigative guy, and I can't do that stuff. Go ahead.
Well, that being said, along the same vein, is there something with this book that you regret? Is there something you feel like, oh man, I wish I would have added that in there? Or is it, I mean, nobody's ever happy with the
Nobody's ever. Oh,
Should have kept the title, man.
Okay. I'm wondering now if I'm going to get really chewed out by my publisher if I tell you this. And there's... Yeah, I'll wait till the camera's off. We'll get to that later. But there's a story there. Okay, I'll get into that later. But yeah, I like that title a lot.
And besides the title?
Yeah. Oh yeah, of course. You know, you know, spent a lot of time immersed in the pages, putting this together. Obviously, writing the first draft and the second and the third and the 75th, and you know, trimming and adding and tinkering. I could have tinkered it with it till my last dying breath. Until that's just how I think every I don't know how everyone else does, but that's me. Yeah, there are a million things I would change, but I had to at some point just stop, right, and say, okay, this is the best it can be right now. On to something else, and I'm sure I've already started working on that, and I'm sure I'll tinker with it until somebody tells me to stop. That's what a good editor does, I think. So, going once, going twice. That's it. Thanks, guys.
Are you going to sign the books, Carmen?
Yeah, I'll do it. I'll sign a book.
Can I show you all the That's the shit I got.
No, it's good.